Previously, I participated in the Great Wrestling Debate with one Brian ZAYN from Wrestling with Regret, where we discussed whether or not it's the fans' responsibility in order to research all of the back history that a wrestler might have before getting to the WWE. Now, in that video, I made the case that it can be pretty rewarding for fans to see what goes on outside of World Wrestling entertainment. To what capacity? Well, just one example is feuds, because storylines don't always happen just when the camera starts rolling for Vince McMahon, as sometimes a rivalry can have a rich history that extends way before a lot of people realize, and knowing about it makes the feud all that much better. So what are some times when this has happened? Well, that's the subject of this episode, because today... Thank you to all my wonderful Patreon supporters such as Bob86, COOLASS Jack, and INIGO Montoya. The help is greatly appreciated, and if you're not a Patreon supporter yet and want to become one, then go over to my Patreon page. Thank all of you so much. Okay, before we get into it, allow me to lay down the ground rules. I'm not looking for just one or two matches here. I'm looking for actual feuds that took place in two separate promotions. So matches like RVD and Jerry Lynn in WWE or any of Kurt Angle's bouts during his farewell tour really aren't going to count, as I really don't think they added anything to the bigger picture. I kind of feel like you got the complete story in their previous promotions. And on the reverse end, that doesn't necessarily mean that they had to have matches in two separate companies, as I'm also willing to accept feuds where a big blow-off was teased but wasn't delivered upon until they entered WWE. Oh, and one more thing. I also ask that you please subscribe to this channel and give this video a big thumbs up, as it really is going to help. Alright, now with all that being said, let's get into the video. The best example we have of what I'm talking about has to be Stone Cold Steve Austin and Brian Pillman. Now, the two of them started off in World Championship Wrestling as the Hollywood Blondes, which is definitely very different from the personas that the two of them would adopt later on. The Hollywood Blondes would separate after Pillman suffered from a legit leg injury, and Stunning Steve, as he was known at the time, would have to pair up with Steven Regal instead to defend their tag team championships, which they lost. Then, after returning to action, Austin would turn on Pillman, with the two clashing at Clash of the Champions 25. From there, after both men would take a quick stop at ECW, they would eventually find themselves in the WWF. Now initially, both men were allies in the World Wrestling Federation, that is, until Pillman complimented Bret Hart, who Austin was intensely feuding with at the time. This completely set the Texas Rattlesnake off, as he proceeded to put Brian Pillman's leg in a chair and kayfabe break it, which has come to be known as Pillmanizing. This eventually led to the infamous Pillman's Got a Gun storyline, as well as Brian teaming up with the Hart Foundation. All in all, even if you didn't like every single aspect of this, it was still a brilliant way to add drama to the feud between both Stone Cold and the Loose Cannon without having to completely throw out their history, but also without having to bring up their old names of Flying Brian and Stunning Steve, which definitely wouldn't fit with the new image that both men were going for. AJ Styles and Samoa Joe have wrestled each other on numerous occasions, earlier than some people might expect, as they have previously tussled on such events as Ring of Honor's War of the Wire in 2003 and PWG's All-Star Weekend. However, they are probably best known for their work together in TNA, where they first went one-on-one against each other in the finals of the Super X tournament in August of 2005 at TNA Sacrifice. Both men would continue to wrestle against each other in TNA all the way until 2013, 5 years later, and they would begin wrestling yet again, but this time for WWE. They would first start doing so in a series of live events and dark matches, before eventually wrestling on TV yet again at SummerSlam 2018, in a pretty intense and personal rivalry, which is definitely made all the more better if you know their backstory going into it. AJ Styles and Shinsuke Nakamura have been going at it for quite some time, most famously at Wrestle Kingdom 10 for the IWGP Intercontinental Championship in New Japan. The following year, and both men would find themselves in WWE, where they would begin teasing that their rivalry would begin again, particularly in that year's Money in the Bank. However, it wouldn't be until Nakamura won the 2018 Royal Rumble that the fans would finally get to hear the announcement that they've all been waiting for, as the King of Strong Style would declare right then and there that he would be facing AJ Styles for the WWE Championship at WrestleMania. I never said that these feuds had to start in another wrestling company. I also never said that they had to be good either, which in the WWF, this definitely wasn't. Starting off in UFC, Ken Shamrock would gain victory against Dan the Beast Severn via submission at UFC 6 in July of 1995. However, in May of 1996, Severn would get his win back via split decision at UFC 9. And being tied at 1 apiece, the rubber match would definitely be something to look forward to. However, we really wouldn't get that much of a spectacle, with their only one-on-one WWF match ending in disqualification after less than 3 minutes on an episode of Monday Night Raw. Allegedly, the reasoning behind this is because Dan Severn refused to sign an exclusive contract to the World Wrestling Federation, and WWE wasn't looking to promote someone that they couldn't lock down, especially during the Monday Night Wars. But as lackluster as the payoff was with Ken Shamrock winning via DQ, the whole situation only has any real gravity to it if you know what both of them went through in UFC. The masked luchador known as El Generico has been mixing it up with Kevin Owens way back to when he was calling himself Kevin Steen, which is his real name. Now, this dates back all the way to 2003, with them wrestling for the International Wrestling Syndicate, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, Chikara, as well as Ring of Honor, which is probably where most people know them from. From there, their last several matches took place in early 2013, and El Generico hasn't been seen since. Then, in NXT, Kevin Owens would turn on his longtime friend of Sami Zayn immediately after Sami won the NXT Championship. What does this have to do with anything? Well, Sami Zayn's favorite wrestler was El Generico, and the two of them are definitely different people, so that's how this feud connects from, before. Anyway, moving on. CM Punk and Bryan Danielson had an epic 26-minute long match in St. Paul, Minnesota at Ring of Honor Reborn Stage 1 with special guest referee Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. A few years later, and both men would find themselves in WWE, where not only were they able to wrestle each other again, but they were also able to do so for the WWE title. And jumping forward to now, a lot of people are highly anticipating the idea that both men may wrestle against each other again, but this time for All Elite Wrestling. The heat between Goldberg and Chris Jericho started back in WCW and even continued to spill over backstage. Now, WCW did hype up the potential of a rivalry between these two, giving Jericho the opportunity to even parody Goldberg's entrance by bringing down his own bodyguard Ralphus to the ring. However, not much would happen as a result of this in WCW at least. For those looking for a little more resolution, they would have to wait until World Wrestling Entertainment, where Goldberg would then defeat Chris Jericho at Bad Blood in 2003. And let's also remember that Goldberg and Jericho also got to compete against each other in the Elimination Chamber, as well as the backstage area too, according to some reports. But even though many a Jerichoholic were hoping that Y2J would get a little more out of this rivalry than he did, at least their prior knowledge were to get them more invested into this feud than they probably would have been otherwise. The feud between Mick Foley and Terry Funk has gone all across the world, starting off in the WCWA to the USWA to, of course, most famously in Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling. Oh, and let's not forget about ECW. Now, of course, this all happened before both men found themselves in the World Wrestling Federation, where the legendary Terry Funk was going by the name of Chainsaw Charlie for some reason. Now, some have claimed that this was actually Funk's idea in the first place, but I don't think that makes it any better. Anyway, once in the WWF, both men would go back and forth between being partners and being rivals, going against the likes of the New Age Outlaws as well as, well, each other. WWE's United States Championship once served for the Mid-Atlantic Territory, and during this time, Roddy Piper would defeat Ric Flair for it in the 1980s. This would turn into a full-on feud. Then the following decade and the rivalry would begin again anew, as soon as Ric Flair joined the World Wrestling Federation. The Nature Boy famously made his debut still holding the NWA World title, calling himself the real World's Champion. Roddy Piper, on the other hand, would openly disagree with that statement, thus resulting in both men getting right back into old habits. And this even led to Roddy Piper accidentally hitting Vince McMahon with a chair. And just think, this was before the whole Stone Cold Mr. McMahon thing started. Hulk Hogan and Bobby the Brain Heenan first met in Georgia very early on in the Hulkster's career, and Heenan would actually recommend to AWA's Vern Gagne that he hire Hogan. Soon thereafter, both men would find themselves in the AWA, where Heenan would be managing Nick Bockwinkel in his feud against Hogan. But don't worry, despite the on-screen rivalry, the two remained friends. So much so that after Vince McMahon hired Hogan, he would recommend that he also hire Bobby the Brain as well, returning the favor from all those years ago. And of course, once both men were in the World Wrestling Federation, they would continue their feud and bring it to legendary status, as the Heenan family would continually try to break down the Hulkster. Most famously, of course, with Andre the Giant. Well, there you go, 10 feuds that started before WWE. What are some others that you can think of? Let me know down in the comments, and please, again, make sure that you're subscribed to this channel and that you set your notifications to on. That way you know whenever brand new content comes out. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my awesome Patreon supporters. And as always, Dave knows.